Welcome, everyone. This is the Women's Studies webinar series on women and activism in Ireland. Today, we are lucky to be hearing Emma Carroll, who is the co-founder of the page In Our Shoes COVID Pregnancy. Emma has a BA in Natural Sciences from Trinity and also an MA in Environmental Sciences from UCD. And she's also farming alongside having a 7-month-old daughter. So she's quite busy, but luckily we managed to have her here today. Sorry about the rescheduled webinar last week. So we're gonna talk today about the restrictions that women are facing at the moment due to COVID and how this is impacting their mental health and also their physical health. So I see some people are going to join bit by bit. So Emma, please just go ahead. I know you have some slides, but maybe you want to say something before about yourself, and then we can have the PowerPoint if you like.
Yeah, so you kind of summed it up there. Thank you very much. And thanks a million as well for having us on, and I suppose having the light shone on what exactly is going on in maternity care at the minute. So yeah, you summed it up. I'm a scientist, I'm a new mum, I have no time in my life whatsoever, but I suppose having gone through the entire maternity system towards the end of my pregnancy and through the birth, and then as well, there was no postpartum care, the supposed postpartum system after that, I saw exactly what was going on and how it was impacting people so negatively. And I suppose it kind of came up in September time. I think I heard it on the news somewhere, and I just kind of stopped and thought, how is this actually still happening? I mean, I gave birth in April. We were in a much different, it was totally uncharted terrain in terms of what was happening with COVID. So it was awful, but we took it because it was what it was and it was unprecedented. However, by September, we're many months into this, the pubs are opening, football matches are back on, people are on the sidelines for all these types of things. And yet women are being forced to use maternity services completely alone, antenatally, during the labour as well. I know people will say, oh, they're allowed in for the birth, but frankly, active labour, it can come quickly, it can come slow, it can be 2 hours and the dad's in and out. It's not really good enough. And then again, women are left alone. Generally speaking, now there has been a little bit of leeway in Dublin in terms of visiting hours, but across the country, women are left entirely alone. Even in Dublin, frankly, what they're given postnatally isn't really good enough. So yeah, I was inspired myself and Ciara McGuane, fellow mother. She gave birth in March via C-section alone, totally alone. Her husband wasn't there. And she's based in Limerick, I'm in Kildare. So we kind of met in the middle and decided to set up this platform. We're basically, we're not activists per se. Yeah, it's a bit of a loaded word to say that, but what we wanted to do was listen to the people who are being affected, let them tell their stories. I have no business telling anybody how they're affected or how they should feel or what they've been through. And the most powerful way and the most truthful way to see what's going on is to just let the people speak for themselves. So that's what we did. So we set up In Our Shoes COVID Pregnancy on Instagram and Facebook. And that's kind of it. So a bit of a PowerPoint to run through, just to kind of give everybody a good background into what exactly is happening so far. So hopefully you'll be able to see it now in the next couple of seconds. Yeah, so I kind of have run through myself there and Ciara. And basically, as I say, the In Our Shoes platform, it's designed to just share the words of people as they've written them, as they've sent them into us, but anonymously, which gives a lot of power to people, because a lot of times people are afraid to kind of speak. They're kind of afraid to voice their opinion. And frankly, it's traumatic. I mean, people don't want to be sharing these extremely intimate moments and details with people, but by God, can it lift a weight when people feel like they've shared it and they're finding solidarity with the people that they've shared this story with. So we've received hundreds of submissions to date. I think we've over 140 posts now on Instagram and Facebook, and the stories just keep tumbling in, night after night, day after day. We keep just getting loads more. So yeah, just to give you a flavour of exactly what we have aired so far. You'll see here, these are all some of our lovely stories. I will say we have had positive stories. I think I have 3 in total. So I've published 2 of them and I have 1 waiting in the wings just in case things go really, really negatively and people really need a boost. But the vast majority is these really heart-wrenchingly awful experiences that people should not have to be putting up with. I mean, I suppose the important thing to say is that COVID is unprecedented. It's a pandemic. It's a global pandemic. We're trying to do our best. But as I say, it's really not good enough that this is still happening to people. I mean, these restrictions have been in place since March, and I'll run through the timeline now. People can see exactly what's happened, or I suppose the lack of action. So yeah, this all started back in March, as we can also heartily recall. I suppose maybe we all heard of whispers of COVID this time last year, is, you know, that thing that was happening in continents far away from us and was totally not going to happen to us. And I remember being pregnant at the time and thinking, oh, you know, it is what it is, and kind of just blanking it, as many people did, I'm sure. But I suppose as we came into the new year, particularly towards February and that kind of thing, it became a bit more, you know, what is this and what's going to happen? So I suppose March was when we all recall the first lockdown, so to speak, mid-March here. And pretty much overnight then there was a ban of partners at antenatal and postnatal level. That was it. I mean, I've had stories from people who were in having their baby and their partner was told to immediately leave. I mean, the rug was totally pulled off under people. It was dreadful. And what was brought in at that stage was active labour, this definition of active labour. And this is actually varied very much across units. There's 19 maternity units in this country, in Ireland. And some have classed active labour as a 1 centimetre cervical dilation. Some say 3 centimetres, some say 4 centimetres. So it's really this arbitrary scale put on when a woman is actively in labour, and it's ridiculous. And that is the point at which she's deemed eligible to have her partner present. Now, I will say the point of this being is when a woman is in active labour is when she tends to be moved from a ward with many, you know, inhabitants in the ward to a single delivery room. So she'd be by herself. So the theory is the partner comes in, he's totally segregated from anybody else, and the risk is entirely mitigated by him just being in that room and nowhere else in the hospital. However, what we know about the virus and how it spreads is, you know, once he is in that room, in the delivery room, he's been a close contact of the midwife, he's been a close contact of any other staff definitely of the woman if he hasn't already been before, which in the vast majority of cases he is. So, you know, this thing it's a bit arbitrary and it's a bit insulting, really, that they be separated immediately after nearly the birth. So back to March. Not only were women left alone antenatally and postnatally, but the neonatal intensive care units and special care baby units also had highly limited, if not no, access to parents. And this was not only just for fathers or the second partner, this was also for the mother as well. So some units only allowed mothers in for 15 minutes a day. Some units only allowed mothers in for an hour a day. And this was all significantly varied across the country. Now, obviously, each unit will have its own needs and, you know, its own infrastructure that they have to work around. But it was, you know, pretty much a postcode lottery as to what you got. Now, obviously, the issue with this, with the NICU and the SCB units, is that, you know, we know kangaroo care for parents is extremely important, you know, babies being nourished and held and all this kind of thing. Breastfeeding is often critical as well for babies in these units. And that's extremely difficult to do when you only have 15 minutes a day. So yeah, that was the situation in March, and it was pretty bleak, to be honest with you. But, you know, we kind of all were terrified, and we said, right, okay, it is what it is. We don't know what this virus is, but this is crap, but, you know, we'll get on with it. Towards the end of March then, and worryingly, in the Midlands Regional Hospital in Mullingar, there was an immediate ban on all partners, including for the active labour. So a woman was entirely alone, or a person was entirely alone from when they went in, including for when they gave birth. Now, the difference with Mullingar is that they are also a general hospital, so the maternity unit is just a wing on the side. And, you know, there were staffing issues in that general hospital as well due to COVID. So it's understandable, but at the same time, people were left entirely alone. And that was pretty traumatic for people at the time. So mid-April, then they kind of rolled back these restrictions slightly, which was brilliant, but not in the case of cesarean section. Moving towards the summer then, we kind of just settled into this period of partners being allowed in for active labour only, which again varies from 1 to 4 centimetre cervical dilation. The Dublin units, so that would be the Rotunda, the Coombe and the National Maternity Hospital, seemed to open up visiting for partners on postnatal wards, which was excellent. So like they might get an hour a day or 2 hours a day at a set time period to go in and visit their partner and their baby. So that was nice, but also makes you kind of question, if they can go in for 2 hours, then why are they kicked out at all in the first place? But anyway, so, and again, the restrictions on some of the NICU units eased, which was great, particularly for the second parent, because obviously some of these babies that go into these units are quite unwell. Some of them won't necessarily come home. And it was a very awful situation that parents were being split up from their baby. I mean, we've had stories from fathers who have caught a glimpse of their baby and didn't get to see their baby alive again, which is just awful. So yeah, it was nice to see that easing slightly. But again, total postcode lottery, absolutely no nationwide guidelines as to why this was happening, when the rollbacks were happening, or, you know, why, like no justification for any of these decisions. So in August, a pretty big thing, the Rotunda Hospital decided to allow partners in for the 20-week anomaly scan. And for those who aren't aware, that's quite a significant milestone in pregnancy. You know, it basically, now again, owing to the structure of the maternity system in this country, is actually not available nationwide for everybody, even pre-COVID, which is a bit mad. But basically what it is a significant scan where your baby might be or is checked for anomalies. So any issues that may be there with the baby would be picked up at that scan. So people have been getting awful news by themselves with no hand to hold. You know, really awful things to hear, the worry and the stress put on people by themselves. So for the Rotunda to let people in was very much greatly appreciated. But again, that's one in 19 maternity units across the country that now does that. Yeah, so swinging on into early September, we had no change whatsoever, no comment. I mean, we had as well around this time a petition set up on Uplift by Caroline Cummins. And that petition was actually handed into CUMH, Cork University Maternity Hospital, yesterday with over 52,000 signatures. So a significant, you know, document handed in, and those signatures have only been compiled since September. But around this time anyway, in September, the Living with COVID plan was released by government. And of course, there was absolutely no mention of maternity whatsoever. We had pretty much everything else mentioned, end of life care, schools, GA, pubs, anything you could think of really, bar maternity care. Which is quite disappointing. But around this time, under pressure, Micheál Martin, the Taoiseach, also requested that Dr. Peter McKenna, who's the clinical director of the National Women and Infants Health Programme, was to compile unit guidelines. So for each maternity unit, or not for each maternity unit, but he was to compile general guidelines that each maternity unit could observe, should they choose, in terms of visitation and when women will be allowed partners. So again, but under significant pressure again, Dr. Colin Henry and the HSE decided to come out and say that with immediate effect in October that partners will be allowed in for special circumstances. And this was really off the back of a lot of pressure from people saying that they had been going through miscarriage, they had been given awful diagnoses about their babies, and they had lost babies, and this was pressure off that, and this is what they came out and said. But of course there was no definition of any of the special circumstances or anything like that. So it was again entirely up to the governments of the hospital whether they determined that a person's circumstances were special enough. So, you know, if you lost a baby, it was up to whoever was there on the day to decide whether that was special enough for you to have the support. So yeah, back up to today, I just mentioned that the petition was handed in yesterday with the 52,000 signatures. We had a rally yesterday as well in terms of kind of building up support and making public or creating public awareness of what exactly is going on. But in terms of what's happening for people sitting in hospitals right now, partners are allowed in for active labour. Again, that's the 1 to 4 centimetre cervical dilation. Dublin units do permit postnatal visits. The Rotunda Hospital still has partners in for the 20-week scan. The NICU and SCBU access is still limited, but people are allowed in, it's just limited. And pretty much to sum it up, there's been no discourse from any maternity unit as to why these restrictions are in place or when and how they may be lifted. So of course, throughout this whole COVID thing, we've had different levels of things, you know, defining in this circumstance, this thing will open, you know, at level 3 we'll be allowed this, at this. None of that has been released whatsoever from maternity. We have no idea when they intend to let partners back in. We have no idea when they intend to, you know, ensure that people have the support that they need going into care. So any kind of commentary from the units would be gratefully appreciated, and it would absolutely reduce the stress on people going in. But I'm not really, you know, expecting much, to be honest, because we haven't had anything so far. So this is what we got from our good Taoiseach Micheál Martin, who back in September, when he requested the guidelines to be created, said public health advice in these areas should be nationwide, and it's very difficult for people, it's very traumatic. And if people look back on the Dáil sitting where he actually said that, he seemed genuinely taken aback that this was happening, and that seems to be the reaction of the public in general. People are not aware that this is happening to people. It's very much a hidden thing. You know, the maternity hospitals are essentially a law unto themselves due to their governance. They can pretty much state who and when gets in, so you know nobody really knows, and the Micheál Martin seemed none the wiser. So of course NPHET was asked on this, being the body that gives the guidelines on all the COVID, everything on COVID really, and their response was that they don't have a formal position on maternity care, so they didn't give comment, and they weren't going to give comment, and they still haven't given comment, only basically to suggest that it's up to the maternity units as to what they do. And what maternity units are doing are splitting partners and parents up, and splitting parents from their babies and women from their partners. That's what they're doing, and there's no public or political pressure or will, it would seem, to actually get this changed. So what are the effects of this? They've been pretty grim. I mean, some people are having good experiences still, and I'm very, very delighted to hear that. And I have no doubt that that is the case. And there are some fantastic staff in our maternity units across the country, and they should be given every ounce of credit, particularly working in these circumstances. But generally speaking, it's not a very pretty picture of what's been happening to people since March. I mean, we had, these figures go back to midsummer. There's been an anecdotal increase, although I say anecdotal, this has actually been collated in a study, that the rate of maternal postnatal depression has actually tripled. Those are the conservative estimates so far. And when you consider that that rate of maternal postnatal depression was 15% pre-COVID, I mean, for that to triple, that's 2/3 of women who give birth are now suffering through this, estimated. We've had an anecdotal increase in women refusing pain relief. So women who go into the hospital who aren't deemed to be in active labour, they're generally sent to a ward by themselves, you know, so they can labour until such a time as they're deemed to be in active labour. And a lot of these women will refuse pain relief on the basis that they're basically afraid that if they take pain relief, they won't realise how close they are to giving birth, and they'll miss out on the support from their partner, or their partner will miss out on the birth of the baby. So you know, that's an extra hour of genuine physical suffering, never mind the mental strain of that. Requests for induction, elective inductions, a lot of people are requesting this again to guarantee that their partner will be there. You know, some people don't drive, some people live a significant distance from the hospital, so people need to know that their partner is going to be outside when they go into labour. Parents and people coming home from hospital then, postnatal support has been extremely patchy across the country. Generally, for those who aren't aware, under the combined care scheme, which is the public maternity system, what you basically get is there's a 2-week check with your GP for the baby. There's a 6-week check for the baby and the woman or the mother at the GP, and then you should get some visits from your public health nurse in the week when the baby kind of comes home, or as needed. And then there's the system of developmental checks, which start at 3 months with the public health nurse. So the public health nurse will check that your baby's hitting developmental milestones. They'll make sure that, you know, everything's functioning, everything's in the right place. There's no issues like hip dysplasia, anything like that. And these checks are supposed to occur at 3 months, and then kind of between 7 and 9 months, and then around a year and 2 years, and these kind of things. These haven't been happening for people. So I've gotten so many stories from people. Personally speaking, I came home, and not only the hospital actually forgot to inform the public health nurse that my baby had been born, so I had to call them over a week afterwards, and there was panic. They had no idea. Fortunately, she could come out and help us. My GP refused to see us for the 2 and 6 week checks. So at 6 weeks old, I had to drive myself and my baby over 70 kilometres across county borders back up to the hospital in Dublin to get checked. And once I was in there, I had to laugh, because I went in to be checked myself, and I brought the baby in because she was 6 weeks old and breastfed, and what else do you do with a 6-week-old baby? Only attach them to their mother. And anyway, I was waiting to be seen, and the midwives actually escorted my partner in to where I was waiting and told him to take the baby, that the baby couldn't be with me. And he was sent around to drive around the city with a screaming, hungry, breastfed baby while I was waiting 3 hours to be seen. It was dreadful. But that's the case across the country. Women, this is what's happening. People are not accessing healthcare. I mean, I was a lucky one. I didn't need a C-section. But women who do aren't getting the healthcare they need. I mean, that's a major abdominal surgery. And once they're 3 to 5 days in hospital have elapsed and they're sent home, they're sent home to nothing. I mean, some people do get the complement of checks, some people get absolutely nothing at all. And then again, one kind of worrying thing that I've noted over the last couple of weeks is a kind of increase in people reporting PTSD-like symptoms. So to give an example, I had a message from a woman. She previously sent her story in to me, and it was very harrowing to read, really, and I shared it on the page to me and said she thought she was 8 months was hunky-dory, and she went to her local GP practice to get her regular smear test done, which she had gotten done many times before, you know, no big deal. And it was only when she went to be checked that she had a full-blown panic attack. She just got immediate flashbacks back to the birth, being totally alone, being checked constantly to see if she was in active labor, and she said it came totally out of the left field, completely unexpected for her, and she just didn't know what to do with it. So there's a significant increase that I'm seeing in stories like that. And I suppose the one thing to note as well is that in terms of the effects on maternal mental health, or parental mental health as well, I mean, there's two people, or the partner's mental health as well. These things often don't come to light until a significant amount of time has passed. So obviously these restrictions came into effect in March, but a lot of people aren't really settling into the reality of exactly what happened to them until now. And now is early, like this is 8 months on. This is extremely early still for these things to kind of hit people, but it's just, it's the case that, you know, you're so busy with a baby, you're trying to make sure in biological terms that your young survives, they're healthy, you know, they're well looked after, they're nurtured. So you kind of just put these things to the back burner, but it's only when you hit something like that, like a simple thing like a smear test, that it really just hits you in the face. It could be anything. So yeah, that is the rights, autonomy and consent. So what exactly are the guidelines on maternity care? I mean, you know, has the HSE just ignored it, or is it, you know, is this what's going on? So the World Health Organization have been very vocal since the beginning, saying that all pregnant women, including those with COVID-19, still have the right to high quality care before, during and after childbirth, including mental health care. And they define this positive childbirth experience as being treated with respect and dignity, having your companion present, a clear communication by maternity staff, appropriate pain relief strategies, and motility in labour where possible, and birth position of choice. So they were very vocal from the get-go, really, on this. I mean, I think this came out very early in the year when COVID kind of became more pressing. So this is what the World Health Organization says. Now, much kind of like the HSE with regards guidelines in maternity hospitals, nobody's actually obliged to follow these guidelines. They are simply guidelines. There's only one country that I know of that has actually legislated for the following of these guidelines, and that would be Portugal. And they did that over the summer. They actually enshrined this into their legislation. But otherwise, it's just a nice little document that people should look at, and this is what people should get. But that's obviously not the case. Yeah, so the worrying thing about this, I suppose, is that ultimately, when you walk into a hospital as a pregnant person and you're about to give birth, or you're accessing antenatal care, or you're accessing any kind of care whatsoever, you do have the right to consent. And that is in HSE guidelines. It's in the National Maternity Strategy. I've harped on a bit about this active labour thing, which is kind of between 1 and 3 to 4 centimetres cervical dilation. If people aren't aware, the only way that that can actually be assessed is by internal exam. So before a woman has even given birth, or, you know, is in active labour, she has to subject herself to these internal exams to be granted her partner access. I've had stories from women, particularly it's known that you know, first time mothers might be a bit slower to get into active labour. And I've had stories from people who've been assessed dozens of times to try to get their partner in, begging for to be checked. And it really brings into question a question of ethics, really, as to whether this is the right way to kind of treat people. I mean, are you going to subject people to this, to have the dignity of having a partner, insurance of a partner? And then again, I suppose because partners aren't present, we do have a lot of stories of people who are being coerced into interventions, really, which, if anybody has access to maternity service in this country before, it is quite an intervention-heavy system at times, and it can be quite difficult to fight against that system. And particularly if you are alone, you're totally alone, you're waiting to go into active labour to have a partner with you, you have that if you don't do this, you're going to harm your baby. If you don't do this, your partner isn't allowed in. If you don't consent to this, I'm going to kick your partner out. That's what people have been told. And it's awful. So just to give a background of what's happening. So basically what you can do is contact your TD, who's your TD or who'smyTD.com. One of the most critical things, to be honest, if you know somebody that's going through this, if you know somebody who's accessing maternity care, just give them a call. And just see how they are. I mean, it's so very isolating. It's isolating at times. I'm sure everybody's heard about how isolating motherhood is. Imagine that when you're sent home after going through this harrowing experience. Your family and friends aren't allowed to visit because of COVID restrictions. You've been denied healthcare when you left the hospital, and you're just here with a screaming baby and you don't know where to turn or what to do or how to process these feelings. Just give your friend a call, your family a call, just see how they are, and try be there for them. And most importantly, to be honest, read the stories, share the stories that we've shared, bring them into conversation, and please don't let them be forgotten. There's so many incidents, particularly in this country, we don't really have a great history in terms of the care of women and babies. I mean, we saw the whole thing with the repealed seal of the mother and baby home records over the summer as well. Don't let this fade into obscurity. I can't emphasize that enough. People matter. These stories matter. This is a part of history that should not be forgotten in this country. When everything hit the wall, this is how we treated pregnant people and their partners. I mean, my partner can, if I was to go into labour today, my partner can go to the pub, he can get a meal, he can go off and do a bit of Christmas shopping afterwards, he can go watch some football matches if he feels like it, but he can't be with me holding my hand, he can't see his baby, he can't do anything like that, and it's just, we can't let that be forgotten. We cannot let it be forgotten. If you have been affected, please, I implore you to email the HSE, because otherwise they won't listen, to be frank. yoursay@hse.ie. Please leave your comments and complaints there if you've accessed care. That's critically important. And I would fully recommend engaging with a body like the Irish Maternal Support Network, or AIMS, who can help you, particularly if you have a complaint, because it can be, again, it's a mark against the maternity system that women just aren't listened to particularly openly or particularly convincingly. So it could be the case that you think, right, I'm really strong, I'm ready to complain, I've got this. And you go into a complaint meeting and you're worn down into the ground and it's your fault all over again. So I would absolutely recommend that you contact those bodies who can help you and guide you through any support and any services like that you might need. So yeah, there's just some bits of support there if anybody needs them. And you can find us on Facebook and Instagram as well. We're not going to go away. I have oceans of stories left to share. I spend my nights sitting up and talking to people who are, I would imagine, typing to me through tears. And I try to be there for people as much as I can. So if you all just have a look, share them, don't let this be forgotten. It would be great. So yeah, that's me. And any questions would be lovely. Yeah.
Thank you. I would just kindly ask maybe to take down the PowerPoint so that you can see. Perfect. Hi, Doris. Hi. So yeah, thank you so much, Emma. This was especially harrowing to hear. Also, as a first-time mom, I gave birth 14 months ago, and I'm really lucky that this happened before the pandemic, because I cannot imagine, on the top of the stress that's normally there as a first-time mom, to having to think, oh, now I have to calculate, oh, maybe my partner might not see the birth, or it's an additional layer of stress there that this restriction are imposing on women. And not to mention, as you said, when there are critical cases such as difficult C-sections or babies who have health issues, and when things are especially difficult. And also, as you said, the prenatal checks where something might be going wrong and there is no support for the women. And now also the postnatal support being extremely patchy. My little one also hasn't been seen for her 1 year check, for instance. I tried to get in touch with the with the public health nurse, but there was no response, you know. So there was an attempt at a visit, and then we were not there, and then I go back to her. But yeah, it feels very arbitrary. All that you're saying, you know, it feels very arbitrary. How is it possible that in Dublin then partners are allowed, and in other places in the country they're not? So what? And there's no official guidelines on this, even from public health authorities. That sounds particularly arbitrary and particularly cruel to parents and to mothers and babies at this difficult time. Yeah. So I would like to open the floor to discussion. If maybe you can raise your hand or just go ahead. We're not a huge number, so I think we can just manage it nicely together. Yeah.
Hi, Emma. So I was lucky to have two baby nephews born during lockdown. So my sister and my brother's partner both had babies. So one in March, one in June and one in September. And it was just interesting, like what you're saying there about whether babies were allowed in, or whether parents were allowed into the NICU and that. So my brother, he wasn't allowed to visit Mel, his partner, but was allowed to visit a baby Johnny. So they had this very strange situation where, like, he had to just happen upon Mel in the corridor, and you know, just the kind of silliness of that, and again that kind of arbitrary thing. Like, did you hear a lot of those kind of stories?
Yeah, and I suppose that has to be one of the most frustrating things about this whole debacle. I mean, to be perfectly frank, I think it'd actually be better if they just said women only, no partners in whatsoever, because that would make a lot more sense than what's going on. As I said, you know, your partner's allowed in for active labor. He's infected everyone in the room at that point. He's infected you. You're brought down to the ward and you've infected everyone. So the logic flies out the window at that point. But as you say, there's this very worrying thing, I suppose, where partners are permitted into these units, so the neonatal intensive care and the special care baby units, to see their babies, which is fantastic. It should happen. It should never have been stopped. But people kind of say, oh, you know, these restrictions are there so that you can protect the most vulnerable people in the hospital, which theoretically are the people in those units, like are the babies in those units. And the point being that the partner is allowed in, as you say, but they're not allowed up to the woman in the ward afterwards. Why? I cannot for the life of me understand why this is the case. I don't want to sound overly critical, but I am. It just seems like a case of control, and you know, you'll do what you say, and or what we say. Aren't you lucky that you had your baby, and aren't you lucky that you're in this ward now, and aren't you lucky that your partner's allowed in for those few minutes to see your baby, and aren't you lucky you're allowed to go hug your baby as well, because we let you. There's a big thing with even the language around this whole thing. I mean, the restrictions come out, and women and partners are told what they're allowed. So you're allowed to have this, you are allowed to have that. So before you even step foot into the hospital, you've already been entirely disempowered by the language that's being presented to you. This is what you're allowed, and this is what you're given, and that's what you'll take. But yeah, in the cases of partners being allowed into the special care units up to their partner in the ward, the mind boggles. There's been no justification from the hospitals, nothing like that. It's just bizarre.
Yeah, and aside from anything else, like in Mel's situation, say, like, she had an emergency section, and so what it meant in practice was that she was getting out of bed, going for long walks down the corridor just for the chance to have a chat with Tim, you know? So I mean, it's putting her at actual more risk than anything else.
Yeah, absolutely. It's not, none of these restrictions are woman-centered whatsoever. They have evolved with partners being allowed into the special care units to become more baby-centered, maybe, if we could call it that. But they're absolutely not woman-centered. I mean, in the case of your brother's wife?
Partner.
Yeah. In the case of herself, I mean, put yourself in her shoes. Like, she's just had emergency surgery, a massive abdominal surgery. Her baby is no longer with her. She's sitting on a ward with other, you know, women postnatally who have their babies with them. Potentially, some of them might not, but most of them do. So she's sitting there entirely by herself, in pain, with no baby, no partner, no comfort. It's just
first time pregnancy, just so hard.
So and so unnecessary. I think that's what really is irking everybody the most at this point. I mean, we know rapid testing is being brought in at Dublin Airport. Why can't we have that in hospitals? I mean, when a woman presents as pregnant when she's 12 weeks at the booking appointment, you kind of have a nice window of opportunity there to say, okay, we might need a test in 6 months' time for this one partner. But that's not being provided. That's not even being spoken about. I mean, in my case, my partner would have fully suited up in hazmat gear if he had to get in and be with his baby and be with his partner. But that wasn't even an option. People are offering to get private tests done for their partners, and hospitals won't accept them. So it's dire, really dire. But congratulations on the nephews as well.
Yeah, thank you. They're gorgeous and luckily all well. So yeah. Liz, you have your hand up there if you want to go next.
Hi, Doris, and hi, and thanks for a really good presentation and a really good account of the issues and what has been happening over the course of the timeline. It's very depressing because things were not good before COVID. And even though we have a national maternity strategy, which promises women-centred care, clearly that's not happening at all. I'm just wondering the place of all the various organisations that work in this field. You mentioned AIMS, National Childbirth Trust, etc. Is there any kind of scope for I suppose, collective pressure to be brought on government to do something about this? I'm just wondering how what's the future looking like? How can change be affected, I suppose, is my question. And I know you gave us some ideas, but it would take a long time again to get to your politician, get a letter, they'll send you something back. But I'm just wondering about the collective power of the organisations together to really do something about this.
Yeah, so you're absolutely right. So when this all kicked off, in all honesty, I never wanted to get into this. Like, I've no experience only beyond my own experience in maternity care. I'm a scientist and I'm a farmer. This is not my gig. I'm really loudmouthed, which is probably why I ended up doing this. But yeah, not my thing. I'm happy to be in it, and I'll keep fighting the good fight, but because that's what needs to be done. But at the beginning, I spent most of my time contacting other people and saying, hey, any chance you could do something about this, because somebody has to. We're quite a while into this. So I know AIMS over the summer have done a couple of bits, but as far as I know, they've been giving in ministerial questions and that kind of week on week. And to be honest, we could have lodged those ourselves, but they don't tend to really have any efficacy. There's no precedent that we would need to get anything done. The Irish Maternal Support Network, I know Liz Kelly is on here by the looks of it, so hopefully she'll speak just after me. I know she has her hand up. They are great in terms of supporting people at the back burner. So I have referred so many people to them. They really are a body of expertise that really gets stuff done. Maybe not so much publicly. Liz can absolutely fill everybody in. But they really, I know I can send people there and things will be actioned and things will get done. So like, I had to refer a couple of people who were being put under immense pressure in the last couple of weeks to consent to things and to do things in hospitals that they shouldn't have been doing, and the Irish Maternal Support Network were able to come in and help them. This thing has been entirely grassroots, really, is what I'm getting at. I mean, Caroline Cummins set up the petition around the same time we set up the page, garnered 52,000 signatures. I mean, we have a reach of over 1 million people on the pages between Instagram and Facebook. And it's just been all of us from all these varied backgrounds, mothers saying, hold the phone, like that's what it is. I'm not an expert in pushing these things, so I'm not entirely sure what the most effective path is to get this sorted. My inkling or my gut is telling me that we need to go to the hospitals, because due to the structure of maternity hospitals and units in this country, they're basically a law unto themselves. I mean, once they act within the parameters of the law, they are entitled to do as they please. I mean, if you access their care, you're accepting their terms of admission, take what you get, That's it. And that's how they're allowed to impose these restrictions. So it's them really that we need to crack, but they don't want to be cracked and they don't want to be listened to. And, they
don't want to be investigated. They don't want us to really question it. Following Liz, I wonder, there's surely scope for the kind of repeal the you know, movement, like that's about reproductive justice. It wasn't ever just about abortion, you know, to kind of get a bit of that. I'm sure a lot of those people would support any sort of increased maternal rights, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's, I suppose, I actually was in touch with Erin Darcy at first, who did In Her Shoes, because I was like, hey, these seem really similar. Do you want to do it? But she just couldn't take it on. Understandably now, I get why. But yeah, like that kind of thing would be fantastic. I suppose the only thing that I would say about the repeal the 8th, I'm very staunchly pro-choice. There's no question there. But the problem sometimes with that is, and obviously the majority of the country is too, it can sometimes be slightly divisive. So I'm nearly half afraid sometimes to say it, because I don't want the wrong associations to be made with this. You know, we have kind of a sweet spot where, you know, the babies are there, so everybody's happy in a way. So, you know, we can all come together on that. But if something like that would be fantastic. We just need to get enough public will. But the problem is with the attitudes towards women in this country, and especially pregnant women, is get on with it. You know, we did it by ourselves 20 years or, you know, 50 years ago. Or, you know, what's your problem? Oh, you're too emotional. You're too this, you're too that. There's that pervasive paternalistic attitude towards how women should be feeling and behaving. And that's the problem. If this was men, I keep saying this, like if you wheeled a man into a hospital and said, I have to stick my hand up your behind maybe 10 or 12 times before you're allowed to have a partner in, like it just, yeah.
If the Taoiseach was pregnant, it would be a different situation.
Extremely different.
There was a question by Liz Kelly.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, sorry. My name is Liz Kelly, and I'm a mediator with the Irish Maternity Support Network. We're a very new organisation, although we all have a lot of previous experience in supporting people, you know, to access their rights in maternity care. And this isn't like the COVID situation has actually just thrown up what has been happening since forever, really, with the, you know, with the maternity care, the governance issues, the lack of accountability. You know, there's no accountability for, you can make complaints, maybe somebody can take a complaint to the Irish Medical Council, and that's really to some extent all you can do. When you were asking about the you know, the possibility of sort of at government level and everything, you know, questions have been asked, PQs have been asked, all those approaches have been taken. And we have really looked in our association, like we support women one-on-one with consent issues, with just, it's complicated in some ways. And I mean, even speaking like what I had a call one night at, I think it was after 1 o'clock in the morning, from a woman who'd had a C-section who couldn't get out of the bed to mind the child, and it was dangerous, and the baby was being left on her chest and she couldn't. And I had to tell her that to call the midwife and to ask to have it documented that she wanted the sides put up on her bed, to, you know, things like that. It has to be documented. And of course, then it happened. But like, this is what's happening. There are dangerous situations. But we have looked at all the legal approaches that possibly could be taken towards this, you know, from the point of view of rights, maternity rights, women's rights, and none of them are, nothing is enshrined in legislation that gives a legal basis to take any actions. You know, there is a possibility that, you know, something could be done, but the risks are too great and the unintended consequences would be maybe too far reaching for a situation like this. So from a legal perspective at the moment, that's kind of where we are, that, you know, there's nothing legally really, like we have a solicitor who will take a case on a no-win, no-fee basis, but the risks are so high that you could end up sort of having partners banned, you know, it just might not work, and the unintended consequence. So I don't know if that explains some of what we do. We support women individually. We will be going online, and, you know, the need for support and for people to know how they can access support. Sometimes having a third party involved really does make a difference, you know, even CCing us in on email, CCing their GP in if things are going wrong. But it's how to get this on a more firm footing that we can go forward. So I hope I've explained it a little bit, where we're coming from, and, you know, and that. And again, if there's any questions maybe, and thank you, Emma, for a really fantastic presentation, putting that all together so clearly and so well. It's absolutely brilliant. Thank you.
Emma, would you like to comment on this?
Yeah, so I suppose Liz kind of summed it up there. Basically, there's no legal avenues and we're at the mercy of the hospitals, is how I would sum it up in a sentence. Nothing can change unless the hospitals say it can change. How to communicate this to them it's something that I'm very much considering and wondering, and how to do it in the right way such that, you know, we don't end up setting ourselves back nearly. You don't want to set the incorrect precedent is what I'm trying to say. But yeah, it really just comes down to the openness from them, the willingness to change. I mean, we've had nothing from them. I mean, as a scientist, I'm extremely evidence-based, and that's apparently what all the maternity care in this country is. It's evidence-based, which is dubious now at best at this point. But yeah, we've had no risk assessments released. We've had no justification as to why these intensive restrictions have been put on, when they're going to be lifted. Fortunately, you know, they'll be lifted enough that we can allow a camera crew into the rotunda over the next couple of months to film the rotunda. I actually, just before we came on, I received a message from a woman sitting in the waiting room there, and a producer came in and asked, was there anybody due in January? And she went around talking to all of them and explaining to them what the program was about. You know, we have to be cognizant as well. There are also women in this room potentially about to get awful news, who have high-risk pregnancies, who should have a partner there, but they don't. Their partner's sitting outside in the cold in Dublin 1, while a producer is in there wandering around the waiting room. So yeah, it's beggars belief. It's the hospitals that need to change, really. So, and I think Julie might have a question there as well.
Please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you there, Emma. My partner's pregnant and we're due in May, so it's been absolutely horrifying kind of when we found out, when we got the positive results, and we started finding out thanks to your movement, and there was a radio program as well. I'm not sure if it was yourself, was on RTE, and just we started to listen to all of this and just kind of how horrifying it is. The extent of it is, I think, what is it's just so unjust, you know, it's so unjust. I suppose we feel a bit lucky thanks to the work that you're doing, and Liz, that you're doing as well, that people are doing, that, you know, I feel lucky that we can at least know about this in advance, you know, that there's people that were just put in those situations, didn't know this at all, had nobody to go to, you know, and now there's a community there. So I feel very fortunate that you guys are there. And has there been any big support coming from any big specialists at all, you know, in the areas that's, you know, that's speaking out about this as well?
I wish I could have good news, but not particularly and not publicly. Obviously, the Irish Maternal Support Network have been fantastic, slightly undercurrent at the minute, just while they're waiting to go public, but they're absolutely there. If I can send people there or refer them in any way, like, they are there. Otherwise, not particularly. I've been in
I can confirm that, actually, that no, there has been. And not only that, but this is one of the few situations where, well, it's where there's a complete consensus between all the units. Like, normally you can deal with individual units at a particular time and work through something and make representation, but this is absolutely across the board, and nobody is breaking ranks at all. It's really unprecedented, this level. The other thing that I think, if I may just briefly, the other thing that we're going to start looking at now immediately is that with the talk of the vaccine, the first people that are going to receive the vaccine are the healthcare workers. And then obviously then the nursing homes and the meat packers, presumably, you know, some of these really vital areas. So we're going to start looking now at the transition and contacting the hospitals and, you know, the Dr. Peter McKenna, who's the Women's and Infants programme, and asking about the measures that are going to be taken in during the transitioning, because I think we need to plan ahead a little bit, you know, and not let this continue. So I think that will be our next project, starting almost immediately, the plans for transitioning out of this, because they're not going to open the doors at once, you know, visiting normal visiting won't resume, but there should be no excuse at that point not to be allowing partners in. So that's what we're actively going to do next.
Okay, that was actually my second question. I was going to ask about the vaccines, and it doesn't look like there's been much of a plan, so I wasn't expecting there to be much of one, you know, now for that anyway.
Yeah, but I think it's something that we can actually push them on, is a plan, you know, rather than wait and see, rather than just wait and see. You know,
it's just so shocking. It really feels like that. It's the epitome of how women are treated. I think I think COVID has done that a lot for a lot of the social injustices that surround us, and it just feels like this is a real epitome of how women are treated. So yeah, so just thank you. Yeah,
I think your point is very good actually as well, Julie. Like the fact that there haven't been a lot of, say, masters of the rotunda or masters of, like, we heard all about them during repeal, which was, you would have thought, like, as we said, maybe a more divisive issue or controversial. And, you know, Rona Murphy and all those names became, you know, kind of household names. But to say that they wouldn't speak out about this, which affects literally every single pregnant person, is baffling, really.
And they must be seeing face on the stress and the anguish, like directly. You know, that's quite dumbfounding.
Yeah, it seems to be it's almost a case of contempt that I hadn't anticipated. I mean, at the beginning we all thought, you know, this would be hopefully a soft approach, that, you know, people aren't calling for partners for the sake of it. There is evidence-based reasons why partners should always be present. I mean, we're not asking men to have picnics here. I mean, we know the emotional support they provide antenatally. We know during labour that you know, the production of oxytocin is critical really to a smooth labour, and that's done when you have secure people by your side. So the fact that it's just been totally ignored, and literal evidence-based practice is being totally disregarded, is quite astonishing. I mean, I had a couple of messages over the last few weeks from people. One particularly awful one the other day from a Dublin hospital. A woman was in high-risk pregnancy with twins, her first pregnancy, and she happens to be under the master of that particular hospital. And when she inquired, she said to me in a message, she started off saying, "I feel physically ill." She said, "I'm typing this at 3 a.m. I cannot sleep. I cannot stop thinking about this." She had inquired of the restrictions when they might be lifted, and she said the contemptuous attitude that she was faced with was just what made her feel really unwell. She said, I can tolerate restrictions, I can tolerate this, I can tolerate that. It was the contempt, and, you know, you don't need this. And, you know, women don't want visitors. Sure, what would you want visitors for? You know, women we find they're happier now. People are happier now. This kind of thing. And it wasn't in a cheery, you know, I came across some excellent midwives who have been, you know, cheery and uplifting. And sure, you know, you're grand, you don't need anybody. And while I was in hospital, and that was appreciated at the time. But this attitude of, you know, sure, nobody wants them anyway. You know, it suits us, it suits you. Sure, aren't you happier without them? You know, it's the hospitals telling people what they should be happy with is the problem.
No, and what to say about oxytocin and support is really crucial, in the sense that it has been shown that support and a kind of relaxed environment is really conducive to, you know, easier labor and less intervention, because there's also otherwise this cascade of interventions once you start induction and once you start all these other interventions. So that's also something that what you said, that intervention are increasing, because of course women feel this pressure of, you know, giving birth in a certain time frame to make sure their partner is there. That's incredible. It's already, intervention is already so heavy in Ireland. And I was wondering, are home birth increasing, then requests for home birth at the moment?
Yeah, so what I've heard from the community and the private midwives, so you can do a HSE home birth in Ireland. It's not available everywhere because that would be too nice. And the criteria for that are extremely stringent. I mean, you might be easier getting into the Pentagon with your medical than you will be getting into a home birth here in the HSE. I mean, lots of people do, but the rates are still extremely low. I think maybe the highest, I don't know, 300 a year in any given year. Maybe they will this year, but I would doubt it because of the availability of, you know, midwives. So yes, I have heard that not only home births have increased, but also the requests for home births have been through the roof, and very understandably. I mean, in Ireland, it's a bit of a peculiar model in the sense that we do have the National Maternity Strategy, which is the aim is to give people more choice in how they birth, where they birth, and that's the point. It has been grossly underfunded. I think it's only received 8% of funding since 2016 or something grievous like that. It's insane. So that hasn't been fully implemented. So really people are funneled into this one thing. You either meet the criteria for a HSE home birth, which is difficult. You can afford the multiples of thousands for a private home birth with a private midwife, or you're funneled into the obstetrics model. And that's pretty much it. And you go into that model and you get what you're given. And it's this intervention-based system, if I can call it that. I mean, you go in and you're on a time frame immediately. And if you don't meet that time frame, your labour is intervened with. So yeah, it has massively increased, but unfortunately people have been unable to access it as much as they should, which has led to a lot of heartache and upset, really, to be honest with you. So
yeah, and just actually on the oxytocin and support, my sister then, she was having her baby in Cork because her previous pregnancy she hadn't had a good experience in her local hospital, and like it was so wild. She was lying on the couch in labor. We were timing her contractions because going in for as long as possible because she'd be on her own then for a spell until her husband could go in and join her. But like she was there in pain, and her previous pregnancy, everything had happened quite quickly and it resulted in an emergency section. So she was quite risky, but still she was choosing to be at home because she had me and her mum and everyone. Like, it's crazy to put people at risk that way.
Yeah, there's definitely, I don't know if anybody has noticed, actually, I've noticed a marked increase in the number of stories and, these lovely stories that pop up about babies being born in garages and stuff.
Yeah.
I've seen quite a few of them over the last couple of weeks.
Yeah.
And once there was a baby born at a roundabout outside the hospital. I saw one yesterday, I think it was Cork, could have been Cork, where a baby was born outside a Ford garage, so they called him Henry. It's the thing, like, it's an actual thing. And I'm not surprised because why would you? I remember distinctly when I was in labour, I woke up and I knew I was in labour. Quite full, and my labour was extremely quick. I was very fortunate in that sense. And I remember my partner saying, I really think we should go in. And I was like, just stop, like, back off now. To be honest with you, like, I'm not going in by myself. The contractions were like a minute long, or a minute apart and a minute long, so I should have gone in. So anyway, we bundled into the car, drove up, and all I could think of on the way in, it was over an hour's drive, was just, I'm alone. Once I step out of this car, I am alone. And I could feel my labour just drop and drop and drop to the point where we got to Newlands Cross and I said to my partner, we need to go back, like, because they're going to send me home or I'm going to be, imprisoned on a ward until you're deemed to be allowed in. I mean, the effect is real, like, it's very tangible, it's very real, and it's not some kind of pie in the sky thing that, oxytocin and partners. It's a thing, like, it's a thing. And like you say, women are being put at risk by not being able to access the care that they should need, or that they do need in labour and childbirth and that kind of thing. So yeah, absolutely, it's happening.
Yeah, there are also anecdotal reports of people having unassisted births for the same reason. They're very much under the radar, but it is happening. It is being reported to be happening, and I mean that's putting people at risk, and it is something that it doesn't seem to be receiving any response.
Yeah,
that they don't. They're not taking responsibility for the fact that this is what's putting people at risk.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's back to that dangerous, I don't want to say dangerous, it's a loaded word, but that maternity model of, you're in our hospital and you do exactly what we tell you, especially in terms of interventions and that kind of thing. Like, you get in, it's basically legal mitigation is what the policy of maternity hospitals is. It's, covering themselves, irrespective. Like, when you walk in, you are a pregnant vessel, essentially. I don't want to be callous about it because there are some fantastic staff, but essentially they're chiefed with keeping you and keeping your baby alive, and that's about it. So yeah, it's back to that model of, if you're not in our unit, we don't care. Once you leave our unit, if you don't get any postnatal care, we don't care. If you're in our unit, you're alive, sure, look at you and your baby's grand, that's fine. And again, if you give birth at home, if you wait too long before you go in, if you give birth at a roundabout, if you're putting yourself at risk, because our policies are saying that you're not allowed to have the support that you should be afforded, we don't care either. Yeah, so it's very awful.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm conscious of time, so I wanted to ask if there's any other question for a couple of comments in the chat. One from a partner dad of a recent arrival, and said your comments ring true. Keep highlighting this, and thanks again. And then there's another comment by Estelle saying the master of the rotunda said that they had rapid testing in place. So something is maybe moving there with some rapid testing. I'm not sure.
Just want to throw in on that. That's one of these twisting of words that we've seen so often over the summer. So they do have rapid testing in place, because they do test pregnant people when they arrive in, if they need a section or an induction or that kind of thing. They do not test partners. Okay. They will not offer that for partners. So this is this thing where they come out and they say, but a woman is allowed a partner in labour. She is only when they say, or, you know, they now come out and say a woman, or, you know, we have rapid testing. They do, but it's not being, and people are still alone. So it's this kind of whitewashing and, you know, glossing over the thing and kind of invalidating the 52,000 signatures that were on a petition yesterday and the hundreds and hundreds of experiences and stories that we're sharing. It's basically trying to, I suppose, invalidate all of that. So yeah, which is nice, you know, that you're being respected like that. But yeah.
It's great that there is a grassroots. It's great that there is a grassroots movement in that sense, you know, and this petition and the rally yesterday seemed very successful. And the fact that you had so many people listening to women's stories on this uplift rally, I think it's really important to keep going and trying to talk to the TD and to keep going with anonymous stories as well, and because it's having a great resonance also in the media. I saw recently that there were a number of pieces that you've been discussing with the media, right? So there was something on the Humans of Dublin, something on the Examiner. So the more this is highlighted, I think, in the public sphere, the better. And then definitely it's important to engage with these units. As you say, Liz Kelly, you said it's important to engage unit by unit and ask them to have at least a plan for this easing of restrictions and for the vaccine. That's crucial. Yeah, thank you so much. There are some other compliments for your presentation from Moira, our co-chair. So she said, thanks a million, Emma, for a great presentation and for the incredible work you're doing. And Estelle, thanks for clarifying about the master of the rotunda. I wonder if there's any other question or comment.
Could I just one very quick question? Doulas, are doulas allowed in at present? No.
God, no, unless they are a partner, like a chosen partner during active labour. Otherwise, no. I mean, Jesus, the fight to get doulas in the first place, you know, as a second partner was very long fought, and only very recently were women allowed to have a second person in with them. So yeah, I feel for people who are relying on doulas, and doulas for fantastic work. I mean, in all honesty, like, before I got pregnant, I would have said it was a bit, you know, what's the story with that? I'd nearly almost choose a doula now over my partner because they just know what's going on and they're your advocate. Like, they're critically important. But yeah, no, absolutely not. Unless, like I say, they are a designated chosen partner. And to be honest, I have in my gut a feeling that it's going to be an extremely long and hard battle to get them back in again post-COVID.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I agree.
Appalling.
It really is. Yeah.
Thank you so much for the work. Yeah, we should keep it going, definitely. And I would just like to invite you to the next seminar, the next webinar next week. We're going to talk about the Repeal the Seal issue with Dr. Maeve O'Rourke, who has been very much engaged in this battle for the preservation of the mother and baby archives. And she's going to talk about the systematic violation of women's rights in the adoption and care system in Ireland. So I think it connects very well with what's happening today in the maternity care system. Obviously, lots of work to be done there. So thank you so much, Emma, for taking part, and all the best with the farm and your daughter, and we'll be in touch.
Great. Thanks a million. Thanks for everyone for coming as well.
Thanks everybody for
Thank you.